Okay, hearing none. On the regular agenda, two items that we're going to be talking about in a minute, rate setting approach and budget priorities. We've got potential long-term power purchase agreements. I'm thinking, based on what I know at this moment about those negotiations, they'll probably be pushed. That contract would probably be pushed until June, the June board meeting. We do want to provide an information update on sort of the summer reliability situation because we're entering into the summer and things can get hot beginning as early as June. And so we want to provide both our board members but the public who listens in, our take on what's going on and what CPA is doing, particularly around communications and programs to prepare for the summer. And then finally, we have the continued item of our election of at-large executive committee. I think we are going to, we'll place this later on the agenda rather than at the beginning so that in case any regular director arrives late, they have an opportunity to vote. So I will stop there and see if there are any questions on the items that I just covered.
Robert?
That's a big agenda. It's the SCAG meeting. I don't know there's anything that we can do to shorten it other than, as you said, push things off to other meetings. Is there, like, how do we make sure we don't lose people?
Yeah.
So there's kind of two parts. One, it's a long meeting. It's the SCAG meeting. And then I worry that if we put the vote at the end, we lose people for that important vote and we could continue it to June.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering kind of, I'm sure you have thought through this.
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is members will be able to turn in their ballot beginning at the beginning of the meeting. So if they do need to show up, vote, and then leave early, they will be able to. We just want to capture the potentially the latecomers. The other thing is the summer reliability is it's not a need to have, it's a nice to have. We hope to be able to get it in, but it is a purely informational item. The three things we have to get done are rate setting. We do need to provide the info on the budget priorities, and we do need to complete this election process. And if those are the only three things we get done, then it'll be a success.
Okay, what else? Ed?
All right.
Hello?
That's it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, I wasn't sure. We're going to move then to the non-consent. We're going to move to item number 5, recommendations for fiscal year 2023-24 rate approaches.
Great. And Matt Langer's going to tee us up on this.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, Matt.
So as we load this up, thank you, Gabby and Renette. I'm just gonna note, and I'm gonna say this again for the item 7 when I go, but I know we have a lot on the agenda. We have I think you can consider this presentation a pretty fulsome briefing. I'm going to spend less time than usual on the individual slides and make sure I hit the key points and then get to the areas where we're really looking to hear your feedback today, just in the interest of time. So happy to cover anything in questions you want me to go deeper on, but I'm just gonna hit the high points most of all. Okay. Oh, wait. Sorry, folks, technical difficulties. Okay, so as a reminder, in March, the board adopted interim rates that went into effect on April 1st, and that was to address the really extraordinary market conditions that we saw, especially in especially in September, December, and January, where we had really unusually high energy prices. In May, we'll be asking the board to adopt a rate setting approach, and then we'll come back at the June board meeting to adopt the actual rates themselves. But the real big decision is on the rate approach, because the actual rates are just sort of a technical implementation of that. We bring you back all the numbers for the rates. So we're asking the executive committee today to recommend a rate setting approach that we'll ask the board to consider at the upcoming meeting in about 2 weeks. And just one thing I want to highlight is that the numbers that you see here are based on our most recent financial projections. We expect to be updating those numbers ahead of the board meetings in May and June. So these could change to some extent, but just keep that in mind. So this is very familiar. This just shows where we are in the rate setting process this year. I won't spend much time here. A little bit on the considerations for the fiscal year 23-24 rates. This ends up looking a lot like the considerations we shared with you 1 year ago. But really, again, because of those extraordinary market events in the fall and winter, we're just not where we thought we would be financially. The interim rate change that went into effect April 1st, we expect that to be a really significant help in making up some of that lost ground. But we're just not financially, and in terms of our reserves net position, where we hope to be this year. Fortunately, we're in a favorable competitive position looking through the rest of this calendar year into the beginning of the next calendar year. And so there's still an opportunity to use rates this year adopt rates that are both competitive, but also make really tangible progress to our financial goals. So I think that's how we're looking at this. It's another opportunity here, but I think if anything is highlighted from the last 6 or 9 months, it's that by taking a lower risk approach, which essentially means rates at a higher end of the options, that provides the cushion we need when we see these extraordinary events. And there's every reason to think that we're going to be in rocky times in the energy markets, especially if we have harsh weather in the next year. So there's 4 areas where I'm going to make recommendations today. The first is in product pricing differentials, and I'm just going to go on the first 3 of these pretty quickly. So we talked about this in the last couple of meetings, but what we're recommending based on the most recent cost of service analysis is going from a 3% premium between 100% green and clean to a 4% premium between 100% green and clean, with still 1% lower than clean for lean power. So a little bit of that expanding product price differential based on the increasing cost of renewable energy in particular. And just a note at the bottom that these product price differentials are assuming 100% renewables and 100% green, 50% renewables in clean power. And then in lean power, we would have 40% clean energy, with about 20 to 25% of that coming from renewables and about 15 to 20% of that coming from large hydro. This is looking to be a better hydro year than we've had recently. This is just a refresh on what the rate comparisons look like as of April 1st. As we mentioned, when we adopted these rates, they're a little bit uneven because we did an across the board percentage increase. So you can see this small business 100% green rate is a 1.4% premium to Edison right now, whereas residential is a 1% discount. We're recommending that we reconcile these so that all of the residential and small business customers, the non-subset customers, have the same rate comparisons across the board, and then subset's going to look a little bit different as usual. But just bring those back into line with how we've historically had consistent comparisons. So this is where we get into really the meaty part of the discussion, and I know there's a lot on this slide, but I'll go through this and actually pause after these two slides for a discussion on these different options. But we've come up with 4 different rate comparison target options for the executive committee to consider. And we've really framed this around what percentage of our of the board's reserve policy do we want to be at. So the board approved a reserve target of 30 to 50% of operating expenses. And so that's going to line up pretty well as well with the kind of middle level of an investment grade credit rating, which is in the 90 to 150 days of liquidity on hand. So we've in the last year talked a lot about days of liquidity on hand, and we show that here too. But another piece we want to overlay this time is looking at those reserve targets and trying to get somewhere in that 30 to 50% range. So 50% is like probably out of reach this year, if we're going to be competitive. So we have a range of options between 30% reserves and 40% reserves. So the first option is basically similar to where we are today with the April 1st rates. So this is a 1% discount for residential 100% green, a 5% discount for clean power, and a 6% discount for lean power. That would just get us to a bare bones 30% reserve target and 111 days liquidity on hand. That's $160 million contribution to that position. This option staff is not recommending. It's the only one we sort of take a position on. It's our view is that it just cuts it a bit too close. There's really no cushion if we want to hit the minimum end of our reserve target if anything bad happens this year. And like I said, and like you've all seen, and anything that can happen will happen, it seems. The next option is what we're calling the low reserve target. That's parity for 100% green, 4% discount for clean, and 5% discount for lean. That puts us at about 33% reserve target, and you can see that's $193 million contribution to reserves. Then we have one we ratchet up 1% to a 1% premium for 100% green. You can see that gets us to 35% reserve target. And then if we want to reach the midpoint of our reserve target of 40%, that would be a 3% premium for 100% green, a 1% discount for clean, and a 2% discount for lean. So that is the option that's most similar to our kind of historical targets, where last year we adopted rates that were a 3% premium for 100% green, parity for clean, and a 1% discount for lean. I'd say that's the most similar, but it's also the most significant jump from where we currently are. And we know that that's, even year over year from where we were in July or where we were in January, these are increases on top of increases that customers already have. So certainly want to acknowledge that aspect of it. There are, whenever we talk about rates, these are real live customer impacts in people's lives. But this kind of gives you a range of options that get us to these different financial outcomes and gives you a sense of how that would impact both the competitiveness and our goals on days liquidity on hand and reserves to reach our credit rating goal. On this next slide, this just puts it in dollars for the typical residential monthly bill. We are looking at basically, depending on which option you want to consider, an increase of about from current levels. We're talking about an increase of anywhere from $3 to $7, $2 to $7, depending on which option you choose. So that's from where we're at today, which is that first row. And you can see the second row, the minimum reserve target is pretty comparable. And then we ratchet up $2 more on the low scenario, about $1 or $2 more on the moderate scenario, and then like $3 or $4 more on top of that for the midpoint scenario. So really interested in feedback. I'm going to go back one slide because I think this has the most information, but we can flip back and forth if we need to for purposes of the conversation. And really interested to see if we can develop a recommendation from executive committee on one of these options or another option if you'd like to propose one.
All right, thank you, Matt. Deborah, I see your hand.
Thank you. I should know this off the top of my head, but can you just remind me how our breakout is with how many customers percentage-wise we have on green, how many on clean, and how many on lean, just so I can kind of analyze the impact on each of those groups?
Yes, on a customer count basis, we're at just rough numbers, or
Yeah.
around 70% on 100% green, about 20% on clean, and about 10% on lean.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's more, that number will go, that 70% number will hit in October when the commercial customers in LA County, unincorporated LA County move to 100% green. So 60 to 70 on 100% green.
Okay, so it's fair to say that the vast majority of our customers are going to feel that the most. In terms of numbers, not in terms of household impact. Okay, thank you. That was my question.
Robert? Robert?
You're on, yeah.
Yeah, I went to lower my hand and not take the mic off. Apologies. Can you remind me what our reserve was prior to the April rate change?
So how much we had in reserves at that?
The percent reserve, I'm trying to think of it in comparison to what we've got here as the options of the percent reserve. So, I mean, we were thinking ahead. We had one of the higher options when we did the last rate setting. It ended up, we exceeded that. I don't know if I'm thinking this exactly right, but we ended up like not having the reserve we'd anticipated because of those high rates in September. And so I'm trying to think through, if we had a high reserve, like what the difference of the reserve is in my mind of a potential very warm summer. Could we blow through the reserve again?
So yeah, Robert, I'll take a stab at this. We were at the beginning of last fiscal year, we were anticipating being right around our minimum reserve level. When the board considered that interim rate adjustment, if that interim rate adjustment had not been taken, we were looking at being, a little less than 20%. Now with the interim adjustment that came in, we're a little bit over 20%. We're projecting to be a little bit over 20%. And so I think that's what you were getting.
Yeah. And then I just have one more question.
Yeah.
So in any of the scenarios, did you think about trying to have one where the days of liquidity on hand were over 150 days that would put us in the next highest? I can't remember what the tiers are for investment grade rating.
We didn't present an option like that, but if that's something that the executive committee would like us to look at, we could. I mean, to get to write, I guess we can run anything, I guess is what I would say. We haven't done that.
Yeah, I mean, so my question was more of, did you have any discussions in thinking about that? I mean, we're at 148, 2 more days of liquidity on hand puts us in the next category. Is it that big a deal? Does that really help us? If we went from 40 to 42% reserve and pushed us in there, could we get investment credit rating faster? Like, is there any, help me understand, like if we're to push even a little bit further, is that a big benefit for us or a little benefit for us?
So one thing I'll point out, and I didn't mention it, but it's in small print towards the bottom. An ongoing discussion that's happening that you've heard about from David is the possibility of increasing our credit line. And so if we're able to increase the credit line by $80 million, that would add another 23 days to the liquidity on hand. That doesn't affect the reserve percentage. But that would, in at least the two top scenarios, get us at least a little bit over 150 days. I'll say more generally though that these I think the more we have, probably I see David came on. The more we have, I'm sure that's going to be helpful, but there's probably not a magic to going from 148 to 151, for example. Especially that these are budget forecast numbers, and we probably won't nail it on the nose. But David, I'm glad you're here. Please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. We in considering the options, we took into consideration the reserve policy. So there's the 30 to 50% target, and we did not provide an option that was above the 50%, the highest limit in the reserve policy. So that was the primary consideration there. We are going through a rating process at a time where there's just a large amount of volatility in the market, and how the rating agencies or rating agency in our case is thinking about that volatility is something that we still need to work through with them. They consider a wide variety of metrics, and these are only the days liquidity on hand and the reserves are only two of those metrics. And they consider the full sort of range of variables when coming up with a rating outcome, of which these are two. Two very important ones, and they're really the ones that we're focusing attention on. But it's very difficult to know what the outcome is going to be. And so my I think bias is towards the lowest risk approach, which is from a rating outcome and from ensuring financial strength, which would be moving us towards the higher end of the range.
Okay,
Thank you.
CPA office, is that Diana?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Chair. I have a question regarding to what extent we have received any comments on our most recent rate increase that just took effect this month.
Yeah, it's a good question. So far, we don't see any impact on opt-outs. They remain low. Calls to the call center are tracking normal. However, people are only now beginning to receive bills that incorporate the rate increase. So there's been the messages on the bills for a couple of months, but people who get a bill tomorrow will see maybe 10 days of the rate increase on their bill, and people won't start seeing the full impact until sometime in May. So far, so good in terms of customer behavior. But I think it's too early to draw the full conclusion yet. We do know from.
Sorry, if I can jump in really quickly. I looked at my bill this month and it was crazy low. And our rate increase hit the same month that I got that California $70 credit.
Yeah, so
I think
there's a lot of things that could impact, but so far from the bill messages and the increase, there hasn't been any noticeable change in customer behavior.
Okay, so there are no other questions. We should sort of poll everybody for where you are in those rate increases. I will just, Vice Chair, did you have a question?
Nope, I'll go after you.
I would say, in my analysis, the difference between the moderate and the midpoint at the ratepayer level is small, but for us is large. And I think we've seen the volatility in the market, and big dollars evaporate very quickly. We don't know what's coming, and so I would be inclined to aim high. I would aim for the midpoint, and I don't think we would get any more pushback than we would get if we were at the moderate level. I think that the benefits to us are it does improve our liquidity, it does improve our reserves, and it does offer us a nice buffer if something bad happens in the ensuing months. So that would be my 2 bits moving forward. Vice Chair?
Thank you. I agree that we should look at the midpoint reserve tier. I think we were conservative in this last round to sort of watch what people's reactions might be. And I think that given what we anticipate is coming, and now we're looking at a longer ramp, that we have an opportunity to invest more in sort of preparing for those difficult times. So I think I'm in agreement with you, Mr. Chair. We should be going for the midpoint tier.
Anyone else? Robert?
I concur.
Thank you. Deborah?
Absolutely agree.
Thank you. Susan?
I agree as well.
Fantastic. Diana?
I agree, and I just want to note that it's speculative, but I believe the CPUC still has on file a request to increase energy rates in June, and staff, I think appropriately, has not factored that in, but it's out there. And if it does come through, then our rates will look even better.
Thank you. Betsy?
I agree. Let's build up our reserves while we can.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, I do agree because, reserve is very important, to me, to have only about 90 days reserve is kind of like short, but I do agree we just go with the midpoint.
Okay. I think everybody has opined. So Ted, Matt, David, you guys have direction on that?
We do, and I do have a couple more slides just to, I'll go quickly, but it just wanted to make sure there's at least one issue I want to make sure everybody's aware of. So I will keep going, but thank you for the feedback on that. That was the big discussion.
Matt, before we move on, I'm wondering if the committee has any recommendation to perhaps limit the number of choices to moderate or midpoint to make it an easier discussion for the board, or at least to eliminate minimum.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, we might also eliminate the low. Rather than eliminate the minimum, we might eliminate the low just for presentation purposes.
So we can say the status quo. And
Yeah, the status quo and then moderate and midpoint. I think
Okay.
that might be more effective for the board level.
I think that's a good idea. Matt, you're not going to snatch success from defeat from the drawers of success, are you?
I rarely do.
All right. What would you like us to say?
Sometimes. Okay, here we go. I'm trying to get the clicker going here. All right. Just want to flag this. This is what the subset rate comparisons would look like. and you can see on the right, under the midpoint scenario, you know, these are actually the best these numbers have looked, aside from the brief period we had in Q1 of this year. So, you know, as we're more competitive, the subset rates also are looking more competitive. So, but I want to flag that for folks just to be aware of it. It's an important group of customers. But the other important item I wanted to talk about is the approach for the new members that we have joining in March of 2024. That's for Hermosa Beach, Monrovia, and Santa Paula. They will be on a different vintage of the PCIA. And the issue that can happen if you're just leaving Edison is that if there are under collections or over collections in Edison's gen rate, then it follows you for that first year or two. So if we enrolled those communities today, that PCI would be a lot higher than for our current customers who are mostly on the 2017 and 2018 vintages. So what we're proposing to do is to bring in the 3 new communities at rate comparisons that are the same as everybody else. And if the PCI is exactly the same, if we have the same spread between the 2018 PCI and the 2023 PCI next year, if that happens, we would still recover costs from those customers. So we wouldn't actually lose money on them. They would just make a smaller contribution to reserves than the rest of the customers. But if we didn't do that, if we just put everyone on the same rates and let the comparisons float based on the PCIA, it looks like on current rates, those customers would be about 6% higher than everybody else. So that's a really unattractive way to enroll a bunch of new customers. And fortunately, the numbers work out that we can still cover costs by taking that approach. So that's what we're recommending to do. I'll just point out, that's assuming PCIA as they are now. Edison carried a $800 million under collection this year. That's why the current year PCIA is a lot higher. If Edison has a lower under collection or even over collection, then this could kind of recede as an issue. We can end up basically being in a situation where they make the same contribution or even a greater contribution at those levels. So wanted to highlight that, see if there are any questions or concerns about it, but we think that's the most straightforward way to have a smooth enrollment for our new communities in 2024.
Anybody have a problem with that? Okay, keep going.
Great. So that's it. We covered product differentials, the bill comparison levels, subset rates, and the new member communities. We will be presenting your recommendation and these other items to the board at the May meeting. We'll be updating numbers based on the updates to our financial projections. And then that we would come back at the June board meeting to adopt the actual rates based on the approach adopted by the board in May. That's all I got for this one.
Great, thank you. Ted, we're approaching, we're with 225. Do you want to do number 6 or number 7 next?
Sorry, there's just one hand from Alex.
Yeah, we're going to ask Matt, these new community, are they coming with the lean or 100%? How are they coming in?
Have they decided?
No. So Hermosa Beach has decided to come in at 100% green, and Monrovia and Santa Paula have not decided yet. They kind of were waiting to have us adopt at least the rate approach for the next fiscal year before they decided.
Oh, all right. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Chair Gold, I'd like to just point out for the record that we did receive 2 written public comments for this agenda item, and those were forwarded to the committee.
Thank you. Okay, 6 or 7, Ted?
I'll do 6. I'll do it relatively quickly. And then we can move on to 7 if that's all right.
Sure.
So yeah, if we can put up the presentation. So this is again info item. We'll be doing something similar for the board meeting, but did want to and we'll be talking to the finance committee next week. So we're early in the process. but wanted to give some highlights. And again, there's more information in the PowerPoint than we'll be covering today. I just, for full transparency, put some stuff in. Here are the operational priorities. You'll see that, we're hopefully gonna meet 1 and 2 with our with the rates, and 4 with our procurement activities, and then 3 and 5 are really about our operating expenditures. And so there is alignment between those those top priorities and what you'll see in the budget. Just in terms of a little bit of context, just remember, and we talked about this at an earlier agenda item, we're big, we're getting bigger. If the board approves the rates that you just recommended, probably we'll be looking at, $1.5 billion in revenue next year, and, $1.25 billion in energy costs. To manage that with the still relatively small staff we have is quite remarkable. But I'll just note that, we're also, with the markets tightening, the regulatory creep always lurking around the corner, and the political and PR opportunities, but also the scrutiny is multiplying. And so we're, I think we're a little bit now thinking about playing in the big leagues. Couple of just overviews. So reminder that operating expenses are less than 5% of our total costs, and a quarter of them are already fixed. Not a lot to play with. The great news that I want to sort of highlight, first of all, is given that we've added staff capacity across the organization, we've been able to improve internal performance capacity, slow the rate of staff attrition, and this is the key thing, leveled off consultant and underspending. If you put aside increases in staffing and increases in customer programs, we are looking at a nominal increase in all of the other budget categories combined, less than $500,000. It may even go down. And I know I've been saying for maybe 2 or 3 years now, we're going to get to this point, and I'm was happy to see where the numbers shook out initially. So that's good. So that said, we're looking at a 26, give or take, a rise in operating expenses. And so that is just related to 2 specific categories. One is customer programs, which we expect to double, and staffing, which is looking at about a 40% increase. Obviously, customer programs is an organizational priority. And I think the bit about staffing, and you'll see the chart, is that we've improved. We need to consolidate those gains and make sure that we don't slip backwards into the situation we were in 18 months ago. So I will just quickly cover some of these budget increase areas. So in customer programs, last few board meetings, we've talked about this. We're looking at a doubling. A good portion of that doubling is in that local government assistance program that Joanne O'Neill laid out at the last board meeting. We're also looking at that last item on the slide, a new solar plus storage incentive program, particularly combined with our revisiting of our net energy metering policy. And this would be essentially devoting some incentives to getting customers who are either have or will be putting solar on their homes to add battery energy storage. We think that that's going to go hand in hand well with some changes that we'll be looking to make in our NEM policy. In staffing, just, we're budgeted headcount of 70. We talked about 69 at the last budget cycle. We did a mid-year ad of an assistant general counsel. We've identified that candidate. He's internal. He's an attorney who is working on regulatory affairs now. As soon as we can backfill for his position, he'll switch over and start working with and for Nancy. Our turnover rates are improving. If you just look at the last year versus the previous year, we've had net gains of 14 in both years, but we had to hire 15 less people in order to get the net gain of 14. So that's been good. I'll just note, little dark cloud on that is that in the past year, 18 months, the turnover rates we've had are disproportionately high with mid-level management. That's the sort of the director, sort of senior manager, director level and above. I can provide a lot of reasons for that if you're interested, but it is, when we think about retention efforts, it's an area that we definitely want to make sure we focus on. Our initial staffing budget looks to really consolidate and account for this staff growth, inflation, and retention efforts, while continuing to invest in the current staff. 25% of the increase is related to new positions. So just to get into that, here's org chart for your reference. But here's how the initial staffing budget sort of sorts out. It's a hefty increase in percentage terms. But as you'll note, a third of it is the full year impact of our new hires, of the significant COLA that was gotten because of inflation last year, and the merit increases that we awarded as part of the budget last year. So that's a third. New positions up to 9 is about a quarter, and the remaining is a budgeted COLA. We do a mid-year COLA based on the inflation in the LA area. We originally had this at 6. Inflation started to come down. It's now 5. Maybe by the time we get to the full budget, hopefully it continues to decline. Maybe it could be 4 or 4.5 for budget. Merit and promotion. This is not an across the board 8.5% increase, but what we do is we establish a pool that we then allows us to have money for merit increases and promotions. And then following the board's direction, the design of a retention incentive program. There's $1 million placeholder there. There are some organizational and policy questions that we want to bring back to you about the design of this retention incentive program. It's a new area of discussion that we haven't had with the executive committee before. And so we'll want to bring that back as a separate item next month. But in order to be transparent about what it might cost, we put in a $1 million placeholder, which is something we worked out with our consultant, Mercer, to have something to discuss but we do have some policy issues that we want to talk to you about. So that's how we get that roughly $6 million increase. Now, again, that can be in a percentage terms, it looks like a large number. However, we continue to be industry leading and comparing favorably across pretty much any metric you want to select. I'll note that for some of the CCAs here that we're still working off last year's budget numbers. They're also going through this same draft budgeting process. We will update these numbers as we get them to try to have as many 23-24 fiscal year. But we're doing well in terms of percentage of revenue, terms of cost of energy, all the way down the line, whether it's staffing or operating expenses. I think, again, we continue to see the benefits of the economies of scale. And that's looking at the proposed decision. So one thing I've done every year is I've gone back and looked at what did we say last year and the year before about staffing and how well are we doing. So more programs, more staff for sure. That should not be a surprise. The marketing and communication staffing really depending on strategic decisions on insourcing. So again, that's how we've been able to keep our communications costs down. And if we move forward with the two new proposed position in marketing and communications, we're actually identified about $125,000, $150,000 in additional consultant savings in that area. We said policy would need one more position. That's on the list. We said that procurement, finance, and data would all need at least one more. Those are on the list. And then we said we might need more space. I'm happy to say we don't need more space. Enough people have chosen hybrid and hot desking and remote that I don't see needing to increase square footage in the foreseeable future. So that's it. I'm happy to take questions, comments, thoughts. Again, this will go to finance next week. We'll do something similar for the board in May, and then do another round before we ask for board approval of the final fiscal year 23-24 budget in June.
Okay, any thoughts, comments? Kudos? Okay, it looks like we're in agreement, Ted.
Sorry, I think Diana had one question or comment.
Not a question, but a comment. This is a kudo. I think it's very well conceived. I think it also demonstrates size matters. This is an area where economies of scale really make a difference, and we're only going to be larger by the time we discuss budget priorities for the next fiscal year. But there's no question but that I think we need additional staff, and I'm very glad to hear about the potential reduction in consultant costs, and if only to help to mitigate the mid-level, that adding more staff definitely should help to address that, to alleviate or foreclose any potential burnout. So I strongly support the budget.
Thank you.
That's great. That's good. As do I think it's very thoughtful. I think it's a good presentation, Ted. And it looks like you have support of the executive committee. So with that, let's move on to the last item on our agenda, the last numbered item at any rate, number 7.
Hi again. So I'm going to talk about expanding our procurement options. And this is something that we've been talking a lot about internally, and you've been hearing, I think, bits and pieces of this at the committees, in XCOM here, and at the board. But we'll be bringing together a number of threads today. This is another one where I'm not going to cover every word on the page. We don't have a lot of time, and I want to make sure we get to the important discussion items in the last couple of slides, but I will make sure we get you the big picture. So let me just jump in on our long-term position. So CPA has been really successful at meeting our long-term renewables and midterm reliability requirements. So if you'll recall, we have a requirement to procure a certain percentage of our compliance renewables from long-term contracts. We've been able to catch up from 0 of those contracts 5 years ago to well in excess of the minimum requirement on that going forward. That was a lot of work of procurement in the long-term contracts that you all approved. We've also been really successful in our new capacity requirements through 2026. And also looking pretty good on our long duration storage and our baseload renewables requirements through the midterm reliability RFOs. So really great progress there. But what you'll see as we go forward in this conversation here is that we might need to continue to go above and beyond that procurement that's been needed to meet compliance because of the challenges in the short-term market that have kind of rained down on us, really. So, you know, we've talked about this before, but we are working really hard to meet our resource adequacy and our renewable energy procurement targets. Some of it's coming from those long-term contracts I just mentioned, but we still buy a lot in the short-term markets. And historically, we could go out and get whatever RA we needed and whatever renewables we needed, even as we had more and more communities opting to 100% green. And we've been successful at that. But very suddenly towards the end of 2022, looking at 2023 and 2024 renewable energy and RA compliance, it's become exceedingly difficult. So a couple data points I want to show you, and some of these may look familiar. So first on renewable energy, what you can see is we went from $13 REC price and pretty stable REC prices from the last few years, looking back at 2022, to suddenly we're seeing prices in the broker market of $45 for this year and in the 30s for next year. And these are volatile. And what's really going on here is there's not enough available. And so what we see is when there's not enough available, the prices can go sky high really quickly. And so you have sort of a double whammy of there's risk that you don't even get what you need at all. And then if you do, you're going to pay a lot for it. So it's a really challenging environment, and that's why, you know, we may want to be thinking about a different approach and doing more of this through the long-term contracting where we control those resources for a longer period of time. Same exact story in resource adequacy. We've heard about that a lot. Our year ahead 2023 RA compliance showing was the first time we'd ever been short at all. We're still working to correct that for the month ahead, but you can see that's coming at a really kind of stupefying cost. So we went from September RA being $4 to $6 a couple of years ago to now we're seeing $55, $60 September RA prices, and even on annual basis still, you know, orders of magnitude 3, 4, 5 times more expensive than what we saw just in the recent past. So this is another area where we don't really want to be in this business anymore, and we can't find enough anyway. So we should build more is the recommendation. So I'm shorthanding this a bit for time. Robert, did you have a question?
I can wait till you're done.
Great. At the same time, it's become a more challenging market to get those long-term resources. In our 2018 RFO, our inaugural RFO, we had over 230 offers. We had about 40 in our 2022 RFO. You know, there's a lot of different reasons for that we can talk about another time when we have more time. But one of the takeaways from this is it has become a seller's market, and we need to be more creative and flexible in terms of how do we get more offerers to want to sell to Clean Power Alliance and not to anyone else, because they have a lot of choices these days. So the team is doing a lot of thinking about how can we make our RFOs more attractive and the most attractive in the industry. Some of these things are sort of technical, and then there's some things that we're doing that are so technical they don't even make the list. But we are thinking across a whole range of of different aspects of our solicitation process and our contracts and the timeline of that, all to make it more attractive. We're looking at maybe being more flexible on contract duration, the term, allowing packaged offers, looking at resource adequacy only offers for long-term contracts versus the kind of bundled offers we've done in the past. So most of those I think are, those you'll hear about those when we do selection, if anything comes of those. But the one I really wanted to focus on and hear reactions about was the concept of doing resource adequacy purchases paired with natural gas energy. So essentially, that's the structure we do with, if you think about our energy storage contracts, we buy the resource adequacy and we have the dispatch rights to control those units in the market and get the energy revenues off of that. That actual concept comes from an arrangement called a toll, which is what it's comes from the natural gas side of things historically, where basically you do a contract where you get dispatch control over that gas-fired power plant, and you also get the resource adequacy bundled together with it. And again, the idea here is there may be sellers out there who have resource adequacy who don't want to sell it to CPA because they are looking to bundle the energy together with the resource adequacy. And the theory here is that if we open up possibility of those kinds of transactions, we may attract interest from bidders who have in the past not shown us that RA, which could be really important in a tight RA market. So that's the first point on this slide. The other point I'll make is that there's because these tend to be dispatchable resources, they can also provide a valuable hedge to our portfolio to help us cover our risk when we have really high heat waves and critical grid days. That can happen a few hours a month or a few days a month, depending on the resource. The other thing that we can do here that's really more mission aligned, that's interesting, is there's possibilities to take these gas-fired facilities and basically move them towards a cleaner future. And so some of the things that we've heard talked about and even seen done in some cases is adding batteries to a gas plant, which can actually reduce the amount of power they run, reduce the emissions from those facilities. The other thing that we're starting to hear more about is either partially or fully converting gas plants to burn hydrogen instead of natural gas, which has a much better GHG emissions profile. The fact is that for some time, for the next number of years, 5-10 years, we're still not going to be able to just completely eliminate the need for dispatchable generation from some of these gas plants. But if there's a way that we can partner with those facilities to get resource adequacy that we need and a hedging benefit that we need, while also pushing them to a cleaner future, that could be an interesting prospect for CPA. Just a couple of things on the implications of this on the power content label and for GHG emissions. Right now on the power content label, we have a significant amount of unspecified power. That's generic system power purchases that that aren't met by our large hydro and renewables resources. Those appear particularly for the lean and clean products. We don't have any unspecified power in the 100% green product because that's all just renewable energy. But we do have it in lean and clean. And so if we were to purchase natural gas energy paired with RA under one of these tolling transactions, we would get a certain amount of natural gas energy depending on how often those units ran. And that would displace the unspecified power on the power content label. Now, depending on the unit, each unit has different emissions. It also depends on how often the unit ends up running. That could either be an improvement to the GHG emissions in lean and clean power, or it could be worse. We won't know until we see offers. But that's a little bit more of the background on what's going on here. But really, overall, we're looking for feedback on this idea, again, with the thesis that we may be able to access resource adequacy in particular that we're not currently seeing if we open ourselves up to these offers. And at the end of the day, this all runs through our RFO process. It would go through the confidential review committee and the energy committee before anything made it to the board. So we're not proposing any particular transactions today. But want to get the kind of a gut check from the executive committee of, is this the kind of thing that we would seriously consider if staff brought forward a proposal that we thought made sense for CPA? Rather than doing this in reverse where we go out and find something, spend a lot of time on it, both our time of staff and the time of these developers. And if it's just a non-starter for the board, frankly. So want to get that feedback today. And if there's an openness to it, then we can include it in the RFO. And if maybe nothing emerges, but if something interesting does, then we would bring it back through the normal process. I'll just cover the last 5 real quick and we can go to discussion. But so we're looking for feedback on this. We plan to launch this RFO in early June. So we'd be going to the Energy Committee in May to get approval to get confirmation of that process. And so we're looking to get this feedback now as we develop the materials to launch that RFO. I'll just point out, this is earlier than we've done in the past. In the past, we've launched these RFOs in the fall, but it's yet another thing we're doing to try to attract more offers, which is trying to be earlier to market. So that concludes my presentation. Really interested in your feedback.
All right, so specifically, Matt, your question, if to boil it down, is would the executive committee have any interest, or maybe turn it around, would it be of no interest to at least explore some natural gas powered plants? You're looking for us to say don't do it, as opposed to do it and tell us what it looks like.
That's fair.
Okay, Robert?
So I'll give feedback and then I have a question. I am in support of this. I think that the points that you put in there, that we're already buying like 30 or 40% of our renewable energy from natural gas, which is, as a part of the unspecified power. I think this is a really creative way. I used to be concerned about the midterm reliability and getting our 2024 renewables. Now I'm really concerned about RA. I think this is an elegant way to do that. At the beginning of the presentation, you were talking about some of the challenges that we're facing in the upcoming months, like the REC pricing, some of the other pricing that's out there, the RA availability. We've got a warm summer coming up. We're going to talk about this later, I understand, but how close are we to thinking about rolling blackouts? How big a risk of that? How much of that is keeping you up at night?
I'll give the abbreviated version of this. There is a lot of risk if we have extreme heat waves like we did in September of being able to keep the lights on. And, we walked right up, 2 years ago or 3 years ago now, 2.5 years ago, we did reach the rolling blackout stage. Last year, in September, we came extremely close to that. And what we're seeing from a market perspective is, yes, there are some new resources online, but there's also less RA available in the market. So I'll say we're very concerned, and we've been advising both really anyone who will listen, but at the legislature, at the PUC, at the CEC, we've been really active in communicating that message that, we're sort of the canary in the coal mine when it comes to trying to go fill those resource adequacy positions, and they're not there. And that means something, and that's risk. But it just, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to weather.
Okay, Vice Chair Horvath.
I wanted to have to the extent that we know, what sort of offset or what sort of improvement would a natural gas option over what we have now look like? And what sort of guarantees are we able to secure that it would be cleaner?
Yeah, that's a great question. So natural gas plants are lots of different technologies. They're different kinds. And so each technology has a different emissions, and each unique power plant has a different emissions profile. So the cleaner plants tend to run more often, because they're more efficient. The dirtier, higher emissions plants run less often and would deliver less energy. So really, I think that's something that if we receive offers for tolling agreements, it's something we would look at really carefully and try to figure out the right balance of, do you want the clean plant that gives you a lot of energy that runs a lot, or do you want potentially a less clean plant that maybe only runs 100 hours a year? So that's all things we would have to sort of sort out if we get these offers. But it would definitely be something I think at the forefront of the conversation with the review team and the energy committee and the board if we actually brought something forward.
I know when we first started, we definitively identified eliminating coal and nuclear from our power mix. And, I think as our situation evolves as it relates to energy generation, I know there are even some folks who are considering putting some version of nuclear back on the table. And so I just want to make sure that we are always thinking about what is the most up to the moment best practice, based on what we're experiencing on the ground. And that includes the reality of people potentially losing jobs if we transition out of a fossil fuel market, where will they go? The ability to transition to the extent that we can assure it clean hydrogen or green hydrogen, I think helps us protect jobs that people are worried about, while we're also thinking about how we transition our energy sources. So I think there's a lot to consider, and I'm cautiously open to more information, given the realities we have on the ground at this particular moment and the volatility of the market.
Thank you. Director Klein Lopez.
I have a question. I didn't follow one thing you said, Matt. When you were talking about the unspecified on the energy on the power content label, are you? And then also as a follow-up to your answer to Supervisor Horvath, I'm not understanding, if we went this route, are you saying we wouldn't know how the power content label would shake out until the whole world knows? Like, would we or wouldn't we be able to calculate how that power content label would look from the unspecified category into, I guess the natural gas category? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and let me just jump in if I missed part of your question, but
Okay.
Certainly on the last part, we would know at the time we signed the contract what the emissions profile is of the facility we're contracting with. But until we get those offers, there's a wide range of possible emissions. So we would certainly know that at the time that we sign up the contract of, is the unit cleaner than system power or dirtier than system power? But basically, if you look at gas plants across sort of the existing fleet in California, some have a higher emissions profile, system power, and some have a lower.
So is there any downside other than, staff time and analysis to at least having that on the table to see how it affects our content ratio? You're saying that like we could go ahead and we could say, sure, let's say the board agrees, sure, let's go ahead and open this up to those proposals. And then if it comes back and it just doesn't sit well with us in terms of those numbers, we could always decide not to go there, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's our view from staff and our recommendation.
Right. Is it just
We
to
just want to do the gut check here of, if you all tell us those considerations that you bring back don't matter, we're going to say no, then we want to know that now. But
Right.
saying you're open to it and we can present that information and that and
we'd have a second, we'd have a few kind of checks and balances to be able to digest what's out there.
Absolutely.
Director Mahmoud.
Yes, a couple of observations and maybe a question or two for Matt. It seems to me that there are two aspects of the resource adequacy procurement. One is financial and the other is political. As I recall, Orange County Power Authority was assessed, I think, a $1.9 million fine by the CPUC. Was that for failure to obtain sufficient resource adequacy?
I don't know all the details, but yes, I know that OCPA was fined for failure to meet their resource adequacy.
And in almost, I've been tracking the political machinations in OCPA, and in almost every article, that $1.9 million CPUC fine has been identified. So I think we have the direct financial impact of seeing a market at this point that is severely constrained, and market forces, economic forces being what they are, prices are really high. So we either bite the bullet, stick to our current strategy, and pay what appear to be, relatively speaking, stratospheric prices for RA, or we run the risk of perhaps continuing to be unable to obtain RA and have a combo, both political and economic ramification in the prospect of potential CPUC fines that will follow us, will linger us. And I also just want to take this opportunity to remind folks that my understanding is that part of the reason that the CPUC did not grant the newly added cities within our Northern California sister CCAs the start date that they originally requested was because of past RA failures. And so there are other considerations, I think, other future political and regulatory considerations that are quite frankly frightening to me because of the magnitude of the unknown and the fact that we have a very political governor at this point who will surely put significant pressure on the CPUC to impose fines if in fact LSCs are short in their RA. So for that reason, I strongly support staff's recommended approach. I also want to share a conversation I had with Ted, and I quizzed him specifically about the question of adding storage at existing gas facilities. And that is a really intriguing prospect because, as some of you may know, the CAISO has been delayed in processing interconnection applications for as long as I can remember. And so the beauty of adding storage at an existing natural gas facility means there's no interconnection queue problem. And we can sync renewable energy that we obtain at the storage and have a surefire way to make sure that when that energy is needed when the sun goes down, it can actually be dispatched and delivered. So for those reasons, I think it's a really highly recommended move by staff to test the market and see what's out there.
Okay, thank you. It looks like we have consensus around this. I would, and I don't want to make it more complicated, and I know we're beginning to lose our audience. But as you look at this, and one of the things I'd like you to consider is when you look at these gas-powered plants is their potential for conversion to green hydrogen. If we're going to really get involved with one of these, could we create a longer-term path that not only looks at a short-term ability to help us, but potentially a longer-term ability to provide green energy going forward. So I'd like to, if it exists, and who knows what the pricing of it is, but I think perhaps it's an opportunity to look at those sorts of things. I think you do have consensus to move this forward, though. The understanding is obviously you're going to bring it back.
Chair Gold, Director Montero has his hand.
Well,
Left my seat. Yes, sir.
Actually, Chairman Gold, you just pointed out because, 3 weeks ago, I was on another meeting and they were talking about hydrogen, technology. So yeah, definitely, I'm interested in, from those natural gas plant conversion to hydrogen plant down the road. So that's very good. Now, the other thing I want to ask Matt is about that flexibility on contracts. So we want to extend the contracts instead of 10 years, go up to 20 years?
Yeah, so historically, we've required that all offerers offer us a 15-year contract term, but we would also consider alternative offers as short as 10, as long as 20. And what we're saying this time is we would drop the requirement that you must offer us a 15-year offer if you also want to offer us a 20, and just say anything between 10 and 20 that you want to show us, we'll take a look.
And also picking back on Robert question about the summer, do we have any idea about if we're going to have more hydraulical energy coming to the summer because of the snowpacks and stuff like that?
So we think there may be more. There's a number of caveats to that. So certainly, people have heard we had in the Sierra Nevada an all-time high record snowpack. So that's probably a net positive for the in-state hydro, a lot of which comes from the Sierras. However, a couple of things matter in that. First, they need to refill the reservoirs, which were some of them close to empty. So you might not get quite as much as you think because there's a lot of refilling happening. So that's one factor. The other factor is how quickly the snow melts. I think everybody would hope that it happens gradually and gracefully, because if it happens suddenly, if we have an early heat wave, for example, then you could get a really sudden melt. We could have really horrible flooding that's going to impact a lot of people. And then that can also mean essentially you're spilling the hydro. It doesn't have time to go through the dam if you're in a flood condition. So probably, we're looking pretty optimistic there's going to be more hydro in California. But I'll also say it wasn't as much of a banner year necessarily in the Colorado River Basin and in the Pacific Northwest. They had better years than recently, but California is really where we saw the biggest increase this year.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Back to you, Ted.
All righty. Well, thank you. And I appreciate the comments just towards the end there on the green hydrogen, both from Supervisor Horvath and Alex and Julian. It's an area that I'm certainly interested in, and know there are a lot of variables to make sure that if we move into hydrogen, that it's done in ways that both reduce greenhouse gas emissions and protect local air quality. So, Deborah, those are some of the things that we'll be looking at in addition to sort of the overall what happens on the power content label if we go down that path. But interested in trying to be a leader in that area and not just sort of take whatever industry ends up giving us at the end of the day. That concludes what was on the agenda, Julian. So back to you.
Okay. So to our agenda, we're at a point for committee member comments. Anybody have anything they would like to share with the group? No.
Just got my solar installed and 2 battery backups and waiting for my approval to sell back to the grid.
There you go. You gonna celebrate?
I can't wait. It's fantastic.
Have a party. Okay.
Hey, Chairman Gold, I have a question for Ted.
Sure.
Hey, Ted, the confidential memo that we got from Nancy, do you think I should give Nancy a call or just wait for the closed session on May 6th, since it's a Hawthorne customer?
Director Montero, you know what, I'm happy to have that call with you. So, how about I respond to your email?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to move to adjourn this meeting. I appreciate everybody's time and attention. Our next regular meeting will be on May 17, and I look forward to seeing you there. Have a great afternoon, and again, thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Time is 3:09. We're now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.